Hi, Karl-Heinz. I think it's
Hi.
pronounced perfectly, right? Your name.
Karl-Heinz is correct. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
This was just a joke because usually I have more trouble to pronouncing the names. So now the most interesting question: what was your first computer?
Oh my gosh. That was a PET 2001 in elementary school, something like that. I don't exactly the term Realschule was called in that time.
Okay.
And that was one of the first computers in Germany, which you can really use. It was really programmed in BASIC and had a tape in there to mess storage, something like that. Yeah.
But it was a Commodore base, right? No?
Yeah, that was Commodore based. Yeah,
I
Commodore
think,
PET 2001. Yeah, exactly.
I think I had it later. I just got it, years later, just for fun from someone, and I programmed some stuff. But it was like almost 2000. So I got, or I don't know, not 2000. It was 1992. I got, a used one, just for fun from someone. And I plugged into the TV set back then and hacked some BASIC, what I remember. And it was not C64, it was PAT. So, yeah.
Yeah. There was no plugin for the TV because it had its own monitor. And
then it was something different. Then it was not PET. Then it was C16 or something. It was worse than the Commodore. There was...
the WIC 20 or something.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That was
the one. Yeah, exactly. That was a few years ago. I can't remember exactly the date, but it was 1980 something, a little bit earlier maybe.
No, sure. But as someone wanted to throw away the Commodore, it was a Commodore, and then the new, and this was, I think, the VIC 20. You're right, and this is what I had to plug into TV set. This is what I remember. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
What you did with the PAT first? Played games? What was your first action with the computer? No.
That was a course in the school with mathematics, and we had a supplemental course where we like to learn some programming with very really basic in that time, basic stuff, how to write small programs in basic language and things like that. But there was a student of a university has held the course, and later on then we learned there are some limitations and basic things like that, and started to program in assembly language in 6502.
And you enjoyed that? Oh, you enjoyed that, or?
At that time, yes, it was amazing to learn that and how to get that things working and trying to figure out how to work that with the registers into the internal memory and things. Because at that time you have a very limited memory. At that time, that was 4 kilobytes or something like that, and at the starting point, and that was very limited, of course. But there was the first steps, which were really amazing on that time. Yeah.
Okay, so what you did then with the computer? Have you got one at home, or what was the the trajectory?
That took a longer time because at the beginning I can't afford that because it cost too much money for my parents and more for myself. And I started with my studying at the university, and there was some time between that, and I started to program there as well as a student assistant on some institutes on the university there. And then the time become that we have these Commodores, CBM 40, 32, 60, 80 something. And that becoming more and more interesting, and because I got some jobs because of my knowledge of the assembly language there. At that time, we are really programming in assembly language. I do some welding stuff with some actuator, which is doing some welding for chip sections, something like that. That was very interesting doing that really in assembly language, and learned how to do that.
You did it during your university time?
Yeah, I started during the university time. I started in 1984 at the university.
And between the Realschule and the university, something happened then? So I mean, could you program or just
Yeah, I started with some different steps. I started with Realschule, then got to the Fachoberschule to get my degree for the university.
But you've used computer, or you just
Yes, we used the computer as well in the Fachoberschule. I had the same opportunity because there was a teacher
Okay.
and supporting people who are interested for math cars and things like that. I learned a lot about that. And when we started to use the CBM Commodore 43 at the beginning, and then going over to 80 something, I don't know, remember the names exactly, and continue to working on that with writing some basic programs, more assembly language, more complicated stuff, things like that. That's going a little bit more larger over the time. And based on that experience I had already, I started with a supplemental job as a student at the beginning of my university career there. And then we started to write things for a Commodore 1 PCB created stuff which was created on the University Institute, as far as I know, and that was has a little bit more memory. The megahertz was increased a little bit. I think, if I
But
correctly
interesting
remember,
story.
doubled.
So you used the computers between your youth and the university exclusively at schools. So
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
that's interesting story because you had to go to the school, to have fun with computers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and after at the beginning of my university career, I had enough money to buy my own first computer, and that was a C64. Yeah.
Okay, of course.
Yeah, sure. But that was the usual time.
But then
that
you
was
installed
the
your first game, right, on this computer.
To be honest, I never really going into games. To be honest, I really play some games, but very seldom.
Yeah, but
be honest,
I also was not into games. But what interests me, how the games were made. They look nice,
yeah.
the sound. So I was just to know how it looks like, and then it's enough. I would like to see how it works, how it behaves, and then.
Yeah, I was a little bit different at that time because yes, games were interesting, but I used them very little. To be honest, but I learned over the time that I can do more interesting stuff for the industry to analyze things, how to work there, and how to get a computer really doing really stuff there. For example, I had some job at the time of the university, do these plastic things, how they created, for example, if you have a bag which is created, for example, and this extruder machines, if I correctly remember the term, and how to do that, and that had been blown up by air, and there was some sensor out there, and in a triangle, and how to analyze that, how large that is, that circle and things like that, and learned how to work with the math and measure the things and change the things and make regulations on that and things like that. And I had the combination between the math I learned in university, something like the measurement and the controlling of these flows and things like that. And then to implement that into assembly language or C language on a computer to get that working and make a regulation to get blowing up a little bit more and to get it more thinner, foil, things like that, to get it more thinner, a little bit thicker, or something like that. That was very interesting. To be honest, I never tried to program games or something like that.
No, I didn't. I also didn't. I knew that it's impossible for me to program a successful game, but I was just curious to know how they look like, how they feel like, and just what is the installation process, how this looks, what is the graphic. This interests me as a software and like a different world, right? Because you could, but interesting. Yeah. So, and at university, you started with assembly. What happened then? So you stick, with low level?
I was beginning during my assistant job as a student. I worked with assembly language all the time during my study. But at university, I started also a supplemental job with starting to getting into assembly language at that time with an Intel 8085, things like that, and programmed on that area. And written some mathematical routines like multiplication, dividing, things like that. Also did during my studying job writing some floating point algorithms in assembly language because we had some real hard times based on runtime because performance and things like that. So we've written really our floating point library on our own. So that was really a hard time to understand how that works.
You like math? Or was it just, the necessary evil?
To be honest, it was a kind of a kind of a little bit evil at that time because,
Okay.
at the university, my math exam, okay, I don't like it. Yes,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
of course I get
Exactly.
it. But I see, it was for me very interesting to see the theoretical part here. On the other hand, you had seen what the practical part is where you need it, for example. That was really interesting. To see the combination, which I always missed during the university, that not really someone showed how to make that practical usable. Only you can think theoretical things, for example, matrix multiplication or things like that, or dot product or things like that. But no one really showed you how to get that into a real practical area and how to work with that. And that was amazing for me during my studying assistance that I had also with robots, working with robots, things like that, to get a migration from a theoretical world coordinate system into something real into a computer, into a robot and programming that and how that works, or get something in later times was, I can't remember, that was something Turbo Pascal or something like that, and implemented that for a user interface with 3D rotation, things like that, and transformation. And then you learned, there's a matrix multiplication, dot product. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, how that works, and things like that. That was for me very interesting, and see that it shows the connection between these theoretical and the practical. That was for me very interesting. Yeah,
It's also more fun, to learn stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Definitely, it was more fun in that way. Yeah.
So, and what happened next? So you did the Turbo Pascal. What was the next language?
Oh yeah, let me think about that. That was Turbo Pascal a longer time. That was Object Pascal with Borland, and then we started to writing something in my studying as also with C++, something like that. Written several parts in C++ in many parts, different setups. That was how that was called, C++ from Borland. I don't know, Turbo C, if I correctly the name, a long time ago. And then we started to write some C code for measurement and things like that in different way. And that was that time where I started to work on C++, a longer time yet.
Okay.
And
what you did still, is always connection to industry, right? Always low level hacking, or what was it?
Yeah, to be honest, yeah. Most of the time it was more or less to industry.
And you worked for one company, or you were a freelancer?
Different. No, at that time I was just as a student assistant working all over the time during my university.
Oh, incredible. So you have a lot of practical experience during your study.
Yeah. To be honest, I have to say I have studied part-time and worked full-time. And yeah, that's a little bit...
This was the hardest time of my life, actually. I did the same. So I was really glad that the study is over, because I worked actually full-time and the study happened, but I really wanted to finish my study. Just for principles, like I have to do this, but this was over. I was like, oh, okay, perfect. Now I only have to work, right? This was.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the switch between really from university to real job was not that big for me at that time because of the experience during working as a student, and that was very, very exciting for me based on my experience I had during the time there. And then there was something then I started on a company where we did some visualization of information of a GPS thing, or things like, if I correctly remember, there was sometimes a network, it's called, I don't know the name, which is transferring data through a channel of ISDN or something like that, a long time ago. And then we used that to visualize some locations of cars and things like that. That was with fire department relationship with things like that, to see, okay, the fire department car is at that point here, and there is starting an emergency call because there's getting up some fire. So how the connection, how long will it take, which is the nearest car and things like that, which has to be deposition, which car should drive to that location, which is easier, get some information. And there was some an onboard unit which transferred some data. Where are you at the moment with the GPS coordinates? And then you have a really a map on the screen, and you can see where the cars are at the location of the town, for example, things like that. That was interesting to implement that. That was done with Delphi at that time.
Okay.
That was really interesting, and things I learned a lot about how that works. That was interesting. Yeah.
Okay. And what happened then? So you were bored with Delphi, or everything worked as expected, and you wanted to have a new challenge?
To be honest, at the beginning, we started with Visual Basic at that time.
Okay.
And learned over the time it's simply too slow, because at that time Visual Basic was really interpreted, and that was absolutely too slow. And then we changed to Delphi and implemented the same way. That's what much faster, because it's really a compiled language and very fast compiler, and also the execution is very fast, and was much easier to implement some ways, because it's more an object model in a way, because you have an interface, an implementation, things like that, a little bit like C++ in some ways, but that was interesting to see that, and it works very good. And that was over a time, 2 years or something. And after that time, I got to get in my diploma thesis over the time, and that was to implement a real new language from scratch, because there had some language which was intended to describe and control some hand-holding machines like that, where you can implement that. The problem with that old language, which already existed, which was the foundation of everything, was because it was limited in memory. They had only implemented that in assembly language, and the memory limitations are a problem, things like that. And compatibly with different platforms, different processors, something like that. And that was my thesis, to work on, to create a complete language from scratch with definition in Bacchus-Nauer form and things like that. Implement a reference implementation with that time in Affleck's Bison, if I correctly remember, it's a long time ago. And then wrote my thesis with LaTeX and things like that. And that was very amazing to learn how things work, how a compiler really works. And then I have to implement that on my own with a reference implementation, and then implemented it on my own in C, because really based on the memory limitations, we had only maximum 128 kilobyte of RAM or something like that to implement a complete running thing. And from the perspective at that time, it was a kind of a way to implement that with, how's that called? Perl is doing that, if I correctly remember.
TC.
No, really Perl. I was really talking about Perl, because the interpretation, it makes a special way of implementing that and how the language is implemented and the runtime is implemented on the time, because it's compiling on the fly before it really starts.
Ahead compilation, right?
It's something like that.
Yeah.
Time ahead compilation, and that translates something into called tokens, or to be honest, just a binary number, something like that, to make it more efficient and getting more better for the interpretation of the down runtime and things like that. And then we have to cope with things like language setups, timing, like Unicode, for example, things like that, to design a way how memory is handled, things like that, memory optimization, how that works, or how you can handle strings in a very limited memory environment, for example, and saying, okay, I have to make a way to say I have several strings in memory, for example, and then you have to remove them. I would say today it's not a garbage collection, but it's more a memory optimization, defragmentation, I would call it. That way, to get a more concise memory layout here and get free memory somewhere. And then you have to make a setup and a way and a design to make that possible without completely crushing the rest of the implementation.
Cool. So you create even your own language?
Yeah, completely from scratch, yeah.
How it was called? Karl-Heinz?
No, of course not. That was a company there. There was an internal language it was called in a basic kind way, which supported some also with real-time stuff, because we had really the need for supporting real time support because they needed into some industrial processes, something like that, to, for example, to control a printing machine or something like that at that time. And that was very challenging in many ways, and learned a lot about very basic things about how a compiler works, how a translation works, how the code generation phases work and things like that, and memory layouts and things like that, and real-time works and on all that stuff. I learned a lot about at that time, yeah.
Cool. What happens afterwards? So if it was done, you quit the assignment.
I worked a longer time at that company, and the thesis was really the theoretical part to describe that, the requirements, put that down, and then about a year I have really implemented that, what I designed really down that. I had the challenge or the luxury to do that, and it was very interesting to see how that works and implement that between what you have thought in theoretical ways and then really implementing that. And then often you see, the idea was good, but that was not a good idea to do that way, because later on you see that decision was not the right way to do. So you have to change that to make a better implementation or faster implementation, or you missed some points, of course, because you have not the time to think 2 or 3 or 4 years about something like that. That's what I've learned all over the time. That was interesting too.
But how long did you stick with the company? So what happens then?
2 years. 2 years. Then I started. I got after that, after the thesis and my examination in the university. That was the first time I worked real full time at that time. And then I started to work off in some other companies in a consultant company, which I worked for an insurance company on a different level, writing something, if I correctly remember, with
still C and still low level or Visual?
Oh no, that at that time I started with Visual Basic, something like that. If I correctly remember, that was OS2, if I correctly remember. We worked on that.
Insurances and banks, they used these OS2 Warp back then. You remember?
Yeah, exactly. That OS2 Warp. Yeah, that was it, exactly. And then we created some supplemental stuff to support, I correctly, help files and into, how's that called, an OS2 IPF? I don't know. That can be converted to Windows help files at that time. And I mean, I don't know.
You started with interesting stuff, with the machines and low level, and then you walked to Visual Basic. I mean, were you excited about Visual Basic, or I mean, because back then you had the complete insight into machines and sensors and assembly, and then you are working with Visual Basic. So, what was your impression of Visual Basic? You enjoyed that, or I mean, just curious, how this is complete different. This is actually the opposite, yeah. I would say in the computer space, Visual Basic and assembly are actually the exactly counterparts, right?
Yeah, in comparison to C++,
or assembly, what you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, of course, yeah. I started that job because at that time it was a little bit harder to get jobs, and so I had to decide because
was it harder? Okay, harder. When was it? Which year?
At 2000.
Okay, you're right. Yeah, 2000 was harder. This was the crash.
Yeah, that was. To be honest, it was really hard to get a job because at that time I have written a lot of parts to different companies to get a job. And that time I got that for that consulting company, and that worked, but not very long because we didn't really understand each other in some different ways. Only a half year or something. And then I changed to a different company, which is, I started there as a trainer to work with C++, PHP, and things like that. CVS at that time thought a little bit about configuration and build management at that time, with make things like that, a kind of Perl. I had made some courses with Perl, things like that, and PHP, if I correctly remember. Yeah, and CVS something. And that was a consulting company as well. We supported many different companies and worked at that. And that was interesting to learn about different things. Like at that time, I started with some kind of, that was ClearCase. I started with ClearCase at that time.
Okay. You started.
Yeah, that was.
You started at ClearCase to work for ClearCase company.
No. We are a training company where we have consultants which work with companies with ClearCase. So I learned a lot about, and sometimes I had to be on customer side to do some trainings in ClearCase on CDS or Unix or something. We did some Unix courses, Perl courses, and PHP courses, and that was interesting there.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I learned a lot about, and to be honest, I learned about ClearCase things. I would call it the dark side of configuration management, if I am allowed to say that.
Okay, you like Star Wars?
There's something like that. Yeah.
Okay, very good. So, okay, then it would be interesting. So, Visual Basic, then ClearCase consultant, and what happened afterwards?
Then I did as well in that company. I learned a lot of become a part of a leader of a part of that area for, I would say, academy for learning several parts of different consultants, which have to learn and to go to companies. In that time, that was more than a year. We started with training materials with only a few courses, and then we tried to enhance that over a lot of courses to make a broader offering for customers to get some courses, for example, ClearCase, CBS, PHP, something like that. And that was my responsibility to do that. Over the time, I learned a lot, of course, from the other perspective, other management area. Yeah. I've done a lot of courses on my own, but I was responsible for that at that time. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, that company has dropped down and get to simply bankrupt because it wasn't getting the business model wasn't working very well at that moment, and that was brought on, and that dropped down the company.
And did you have any contact with Java back then?
At that time, not that time. The first Java contacts coming later, if I correctly remember, 2004, 5, something.
Okay, and how it happened?
Oh yeah, there was something in between. There was I worked as a consultant with a longer time with PHP and Delphi and things like that, and CDS as well. And we had a larger companies which we are supporting because they had a large code base in Fortran.
Okay.
And they don't want to convert that because they invested so many times in that. And there was an idea how to get that into a working thing, to bind that into PHP as a library to compile that into, because you can compile C code and use that from PHP, for example. Mm-hmm. And that was the idea, and that we worked a long time, half a year or something about that, to get that into PHP, because that Fortran parts were, I don't know, million lines of code because they wanted to slow that away. Mm-hmm. So I learned a little bit about that Fortran, except the time where I had practical exams at the university where I looked at Fortran at that time, but I learned a little bit Fortran in detail. That was interesting, yeah. And then we did a kind of a proof of concept to get things looking, is that possible? Could that get working or something like that? And the result was, yes, it was. But the company has decided not to continue that project on the time. And then the problem was that the company which has supported that get bankrupted as well, because it was a problem at that time at, how's that called? Insolvenz? I don't know the English term for that.
I don't know either, but this is like bankrupt. This is like the process of failing bankruptcy.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, then it's correct. Yeah. And then I had a free time about 2 or 3 months completely. And then I was completely out of job. That was a little bit hard because you are scratching on the doors on several and going to the official part. And that was this interesting time to learn what things have to be done, because at that time I already was in contact with my wife at that time, and we already had a rent a flat and things like that, and we had to pay our bills and things like that. That was a little bit hard at that time. And then was luckily only 2 or 3 months, if I correctly remember. But that time I had done a lot of that, and then later I started with a different company. Agency is something like that, which is worked for kind of websites, things like that. CMS systems, things like that. Some support for server solutions for different companies, and I worked a lot longer time, about 2 years, if I correctly remember. And then I learned a lot about things like, I continue my experience with PHP, because many of the things were done in PHP and Perl as well, things like that. MySQL, Postgres, Apache, if I correctly remember. Yeah, Apache. I learned a lot how Apache works at that time. Apache HTTP server.
Yeah.
And I compiled that a lot of times on my own and things like that. That was an interesting time to learn that and do that on my own. Yeah. And that was interesting to learn that. And we made some solution for governments, things like that, kind of websites and things like that. That was the interesting part. Yeah.
And did you learn Java there?
No, not that time. Coming a little bit later, then I started with Java.
How you started with Java?
Oh yeah, that was an interesting part. I worked in a company at that time I had some different steps in between, small steps between that. I started to, at that time at that agency, I stopped that working because I don't like the job there at that company. I stopped with that. And then I started as a freelancer at that time, 2004. That was my first time as a freelancer to work with that. Because of those problems I don't like, but that's not the problem here. And then I started as a freelancer. I had some special small jobs in between with working with PHP and things like that. And then I started a larger part, which was a little bit larger, and I worked at a bank in Stuttgart at that time as a freelancer already.
Okay.
And that was my first real job, because it was interesting. I tried to get an offer there. I made an interview appointment at that time in Stuttgart. If I correctly remember, I drove down with a train down there. I was there at 11 o'clock at that interview and gone back in the train. And a few minutes later, I started with the train. I got a call back. That was on Thursday. And then they called me and say, okay, you will be the right person, and you can start on Monday for a year.
Okay.
Ooh. I thought, ooh, that's hard. Okay. And then I have to talk with my wife at that time, because so that means over the week I had to be in Stuttgart instead of at home and things like that. Then coming home only at weekends. And that was the time I started with more or less detail on PHP. And during that time, we had some problems to do some testing with a SOAP implementation of that PHP application. That was a large one where we implemented with PHP, SOAP interfaces, things like that, and many other things. And that was the time where we started with a testing tool to test that SOAP implementation based on configuration on Excel that time, if I correctly remember, a long time ago. And then we started to I started with a colleague with some experience in Java at that time. And then I started really doing the first Java stuff at that time. That was the first time I got really in contact with Java in detail.
But then you are a young Java developer.
In a kind of, yes. I did. Yes, I am. Yes.
Fresh blood.
more or less fresh. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm not really that young at that time. Yeah.
This was Java 2004, JDK 1.4, I think, right?
No, if I correctly remember, or if I
1.4.
But I'm not. Yeah, I might be. Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure at that time. Yeah, could be. Yeah.
And you like Java?
The point was, at that time, if I correctly remember, it gives us the opportunity to have already some unit testing frameworks. What's that called?
SOAP UI? This was...
No, SOAP, yeah, that wasn't existing at that time, if I correctly remember. Web Unit or something, if I correctly remember. I don't know the name exactly, but I'm not sure. And that was the first time I get some contact with really doing some unit testing, because at that time PHP doesn't have a unit testing framework at all. And that was some of the problems we had to do some testing with that stuff. And that was interesting thing. Then we did there was some parts already written in Java, and then I moved a little bit to Java in that time, and I started with things like Hibernate the first time, if I correctly remember. Other things, I don't know.
So you learned to Hibernate, so you already learned Java, so you were okay?
Yeah. that was the first time I used Java and Hibernate. At that time, I can remember that we wrote the XML files for describing the entity at that time. Yeah. Really
And you like Java or not? So what is your impression of this entire thing?
To be honest, at that time, I'm not sure about that because that was very early, and I can't really remember at that time.
Okay.
What I liked was the part that I can really write good, or to write unit test. Good unit test is a different point of view from the point of today. It's a little bit different, but that was really the opportunity.
Actually, you could talk the entire podcast about writing unit tests, because what is a good unit test, no one knows. I would say.
Exactly.
It really depends whether the unit, what means good unit test, right? It depends whether we are writing an article or are in project. So this is actually two different points.
Two different stories, of course.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So, and you stick with Java?
Then I stick more or less with Java and switched completely to Java at that time. I had some relationship with PHP based on my knowledge, of course, but I changed more and more to the Java world at that time. Then I started some information about writing my own things, trying to do that, and worked on some companies with some collaboration solution. I don't know the name at the moment. We implemented some stuff, configured some stuff. How's that called? That was a very, very early stage of some kind of a sourceforge in a more smaller size there. And we wanted to implement that and make that in a kind of internal distribution platform for the company at that time.
Wow.
And there was many things involved, like PHP, Java, installations, RPM generations, and all that stuff, which was really needed to do that. And that was interesting to learn how that combination of the different tools, like you have an access to a tool, you have to analyze that with bug tracker, things like that, which are today no big deal. But at that time, you have something integrated, a bug tracker into a complete platform with works and things like that. That was interesting to learn that and get some contact with, what was it called, SVK, Subversion, and things like that,
Mm-hmm.
and over the time. And that was interesting to learn all at that time, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, interesting. So, and then?
Oh, yeah. Then there was coming a big bank in Frankfurt where I started to work on a larger area.
You are based in the near Frankfurt?
No, I'm based in Aachen.
Okay.
In the triangle of Belgium, Netherlands, and Germany, exactly, in that location.
Okay.
And so I worked on a big company, and we started to make some application which is running for a kind of calculation for cash flows on different things with large number of data sets, a large number, really a big number of data records, 2 or 3 million, if I correctly remember, per day and things like that. And that was the first time I get really in contact with the JEE at that time, J2EE at that time. And then we started really that was Java 1.5. The first time we started with an Hibernate and with annotations, if I correctly remember.
JPA maybe.
That was the JPA part, yes. That was, I don't know, the first beta version we started there at that time, yeah.
Did it work?
Yes, it did work. We had to learn the usual thing. You start thinking about how to optimize code, but of course, usually the problem is what you predict is not what is really doing there in the end. And the problem was, I had made some bets with some colleagues, and I bet what you think is the problem is not really the problem. I won that 2 or 3 times that bet. And then they started to really think how they could analyze the problem and started to measure before they predict what was the problem here. Oh, I'll write that loop in a different ways, something like that. That was usually not the problem. We had most of the time the problem with we are trying to get information from the database. And
exactly. Locking, transactions, this is always the problem.
Transaction or doing so many things in several steps instead of changing that with a simple cache or something like that. That is much more efficient than trying to figure out what the real problem was. Yeah, that was interesting to learn. And That was the most important thing I learned over the time, that predicting something, in particular on the hotspot in JVM, that you never really know or really not can predict what is faster in the end.
Yeah.
You need to do the real measurement. Anything else is useless.
My strategy was always, write simple code and don't care.
Yeah.
And if you write simple code, the chances are the highest that the JVM will manage to optimize your code. So this was...
Exactly. That was the point. I always said, get correct code, make readable code. And then if you have really a performance problem, then check where it really is. Do a measurement exactly. And then you can say, oh, that area I have to optimize in several ways or something. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I stick with Java. And have you used Maven back then already?
Yes, that was already Maven. If I correctly remember, that was we started several parts with Ant. That was a time where we started with Ant, and I changed a lot over the time to start with Maven 2 at that time, if I correctly remember. Yeah.
Yeah. So you didn't have the experience with Jelly. You remember Jelly?
No, I had never used that Jelly at the moment. I know that that's a predecessor of
Maven 1.
Maven 1.
There was Jelly was this is actually executable XML language.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, I know. Yeah. I have made later time a migration project from Maven 1 to Maven 2. Okay. So I know how it looks like. But that time we used already Maven 2 because we have Ant scripts, a lot of them. And they were extremely large, not maintainable, to be honest. And that was a big problem sometimes. And then I had the opportunity to migrate that to Maven 2 at the time. And they were very, very good.
Interestingly, at the beginning of Java EE, I ignored Maven completely because Ant was really well supported by NetBeans and it was faster. So I could, Ant was way faster than Maven. So, and I was always interested in speed and fast deployments. And then Maven, Maven 2, I switched later. I actually wrote a post back then about why I'm using Ant and not Maven. And I have to look it up which year it was. But I used Maven later, but then I only use Maven. And also funny thing is, because of Java EE, Maven was always simple in my project, right? So I only had 2 dependencies, no plugins, actually, never plugins, almost never. So I had the simplest Maven projects. I was a huge Maven fan because it always worked in my case. I only had, one provider dependency, and this basically was. This is my Maven story, right?
Yeah, that's one of the things I had because many people at that time realized we had 60,000 lines of Ant build scripts. And the problem was, of course, if you do that over the time, you starting to work on conventions because different layout, where's the tests and things like that. And I suggested exactly that because Maven already did that at time. And then they were astonished that it was that simple. It's much easier. It dropped down the number of lines dramatically. Mm-hmm. And that makes it more simple. And to make it more simple, that means also we could introduce that into a continuous integration. At that time was Continuum, Cruise Control. I can't really remember
Continuum
the name.
Was from Apache, and Cruise Control, Anthill, Cruise Control. This one, the big.
Yeah, exactly. Anthill, something like that. Yeah, I could like remember. Yeah, and that was the interesting thing. That made many things much more simpler. Yeah,
Crucible.
Automatically running.
Still, you remember Crucible? No, it came. It was also a continuous.
Yeah. Uh-huh. I hadn't heard the name, but never used it.
I have to look it up now. Just the name come. I think I used it once, but Crucible is exactly. Crucible was also okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was interesting, and I learned a lot over the time. We used Subversion, and many people didn't understand Subversion at that time. We worked already with feature branches, and many people at the beginning started to work on trunk-based, which is today back in the time, but based on other requirements, and that was interesting to make really merging, but that was, to be honest, a real pain, to be honest, because you had to do that manually, everything manually. That was 1.3, 1.4, if I correctly remember. Mm-hmm. And that was interesting to learn that. And people were astonished that it works and it works that well. And we really with feature branches that works very well and stabilized the software over the time in a very good way. Because people have always the problem, you're breaking something because you checked in something on the trunk and things like that. And exactly that, drop that down, we have more or less a stable line and already built with branches at that time. That was interesting. Not automatically, more or less manual, but that worked. Yeah.
And how you became Maven committer?
Oh, that took a long time longer, because there are some other companies in between where I worked with Maven all the time, used that more or less in Eclipse and things like that, and then all the stuff with Subversion all the time. And
Java as well, or no?
Both. I have used Java EE and I use plain Java in several areas. Like, if I correctly remember, I've done some implementation of web services with standard Java 1.5, 6. I'm not sure at that time. Also with Hibernate and things like that. Some SOAP interface with Access 2, if I correctly remember, but there was the time where we used that. And then we used Tomcat. 5, 6, I don't know exactly the number. And then we started already with some CI solution, at that time Hudson. And then we continued that with different things, and a small project in between where I have to do the migration between Maven 1 to Maven 2, things like that. And if I correctly remember, then I come to a large company. I can name it Deutsche Boerse in Frankfurt. And that was the first job as a freelancer where I'm allowed to contribute to open source. And that was the time where I started a little bit. The problem was that we should create RPMs in that time. And there was only one plugin, the RPM Maven plugin from the Mojo host day. And then I started to use it because I needed to do that, because we had some C++ code and Java code we need to deploy and things like that. And I found obviously some issues in the RPM Maven plugin at that time. And then I had asked my manager there if it is okay, because I have found some problems which prevented us from continuing. And then he said, if you don't give something internally outside, if it's something of the tools we are using, then you are allowed to contribute there. And you do that in your working time perfectly. That was really amazing for me.
Great manager, right?
Exactly, because they realized what is really up to. And if you think it was about 2010, something around that time. And then I started to give some issue recordings at that time and things like that. And I started to producing some patches over the time. And the interesting thing was that there was on the other side a real amazing guy at that time. And he realized, okay, there's really bug in there. And the first time I did that, and within 2 hours, I had a new version because he integrated in my patch and get a new release out there, and I could continue my work. And that did over 3 or 4 days, because always I'm testing that and seeing, oh, there was a problem. I fixed that. I found the problem in the source code and things like that. And over the time, it comes more and more. And after a week...
For this, what you're explaining right now, you actually save time, because you didn't have to maintain your own fork. You contributed the stuff. So Maven became better, and the Deutsche Boerse saved actually a lot of money, because they could just use vanilla open source. They didn't have to maintain someone internally to manage their fork. So actually, this was a huge win-win situation, right? Everyone won.
Of course it was.
Yeah.
Of course it was. Exactly. That was really amazing part for me. And on the other hand, the other guy was amazing too, because
who was it?
Produced.
If he's amazing, you have to name it.
I have to find out the name. I'm not.
Yeah, I will put it to show notes. We will find the amazing guy, and you send me a mail later, so I will put it to the show
definitely
notes.
I would do so. Yeah, because and after a week or so, there's coming back a mail to me privately and said, "Hey, it's really good. Yeah, you're doing so many patches and working on, but to be honest, I'm tired of doing that on my own. What about if you do that on your own, come a committer on that area here on Mojo House, and to do that on your own." And I said, oh, yeah, sure. And then I do that for a half a year or longer, and it's coming more and more over the time in that area. I started to work on several of them and things like that. It took some time, yeah. And then after 2-3 years, at 2013 or something, Robert Schulte, because I already knew him over the Mojo House at that time, because I fixed several of the plugins over that time. I don't know, assembly plugin, versions plugin, many of them in the meantime. And he started to say, what do you think about becoming Maven committer? Because you know already the ecosystem, how it works, how to write plugins and things like that. And he invited me to become a Maven committer at that time, because I already produced some issue recordings for Maven plugins, things like that, and already produced some pull requests for that at that time. Yeah. And then I started. That was in 2013 in December, and then I was invited to become a Maven committer at that time. That was my journey to becoming a Maven committer at that time.
Yeah, that's a great news. So it means if I can, convince you, you can commit whatever I like, right? So
I would say theoretically yes, but in practical no.
I would have to talk with you and with Robert Scholter in the future,
to be honest, yeah, in theory yes, but you have to be clear. If I commit something on Maven, whatever plugin or Maven core itself, if I commit something, anyone else is on the mailing list will see what I commit. And if I'm doing something really bad, something will recognize that and will mail me to me, of course.
Yeah,
yes, of course. I did some issues. Of course, I produced a problem on a branch, but already someone read that and said, there was a problem in there. Yes, of course, you're right.
Which is a good thing. This is why source is open, right? Open source.
Not only the open source, that one, because if you commit something there is a mailing list automatically that every commit is automatically transferred to everybody who is subscribed to that mailing list, and all the committers are subscribed to that mailing list and can look what is going on the commits on the different repositories, because the Maven project has about 100 repositories in the end, and so you don't look at each of the repositories, so you get a more condensed view of what is happening on the different repositories. Then you can see, there is something happening, there is something going on, and see what is going on. That idea is coming up and things like that. Yeah, it's a kind of a synchronized review process in a way.
And are you still freelancer right now?
Yes, I'm still freelancer.
And what are you doing? Mainly Maven, or?
No, I'm really working at projects, really doing development work. I would call it DevOps today, really some development and operations like installation, continuous integration. Yes, Maven, of course, I do. Really implementing Java code, Java 11 at the moment, where the project I'm working with a large project, and really working on the code with databases, testing, integration testing, end-to-end testing, all that stuff here is working.
Okay, so but basically, like me, Java consultant and developer, right? So
yeah, I would say so. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So interesting. Now the suggestion, because I wanted to talk with you specifically about Maven, and it was too interesting, so it took longer. I would like to re-invite you back. And then we only have to talk about Maven. My idea is now about Maven, something we had already chat, before. Maybe feature branches, maybe, about whatever you like, about DevOps, continuous integration, about maybe quality of unit tests. Just a chat. And to have a chat. What do you think about this?
Oh, that would be great, yeah.
And then we just focus on these topics I mentioned right now. And because it is going to be too long. This one.
Maven would be interesting, and maybe about the development of Maven, what is going on at the moment. Because, for example,
always freestyle. You know me right now, right? No agenda. Otherwise, it's going to be boring. No agenda. This is the main Airhex FM. And these were the topics. What interests me from you is, of course, Maven. I have specific ideas about Maven plugins relations. We had already the chat last year, I think. And then, we can have a chat about unit testing, integration testing, DevOps, and continuous integration. Because if you are working with it, I'm working with it. I'm always curious about, fresh ideas and opinions. And you are a young Java developer, so I'm really curious, Cool. Where people can find you, how they can hire you, and give me your Twitter and GitHub, whatever you have.
All of them. Twitter, KHMarbase, KHMarbase, and that's the same on GitHub or on Xing, on LinkedIn or something. Just put in my name in the search engine and you will find me.
Your first name is actually straightforward, Karl-Heinz. Your last name, I thought this is Marbase or Marbase?
To be correctly pronounced Marbase, because it's becoming from Belgium, Belgium speaking or
Marbase,
French speaking. Okay. But it's written with AI instead of EI, for example. Okay,
perfect. I will put it to show notes anyway. So, thank you. Was a pleasure.
Thank you.
And I would really I have to re-invite you back to talk about, the Maven actually, what was actually planned.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, very, very appreciate that. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
bye.
Very nice. Okay, thank you very much. Bye.